You're about to have a conference to discuss the lessons learned from the crisis and whether the global financial system is resilient, more resilient now. What really is the conclusion? Is it resilient enough to withstand any kind of future financial crisis?
We've made a lot of progress on some of the technical aspects. We made a lot of progress in capitalization. Most banks are 7 to 10 times better capitalized than they were before the crisis. We made a lot of progress on regulation, on supervision, on understanding the system itself and how it works, the types of products, the derivatives, etc. But now we really have to focus, and we've been focusing since 10 years now, on how to make it possible for those that we left behind to catch up. One of the problems that we have now, and why we have all these electoral surprises everywhere in the world, is that we left a lot of people outside of this progress, outside of the opportunities, and this is something that we now have to focus on because it is giving results which are extremely, unpredictable, many times negative, having to do with the quality of the governance. So it is becoming not only an economic, financial problem, it's clearly a social problem and a political problem, and then a quality of governance and governments.
Boeing's CEO is literally in the last few moments saying that there's a codependency to the US-China relationship and that Boeing is at the table when it comes to the US and China discussing trade. What are your thoughts on multilateralism? Is it going away, and is that a danger?
The only way to deal effectively with things like international trade, with international financial flows, with challenges like migration, climate change, is through international cooperation, through multilateralism. This is how we got to where we are today after many crises, after many collisions. And the way to get it back on its feet clearly is to more cooperation and more multilateral approaches. I can understand that some countries may feel frustrated. The processes sometimes are a little too slow. But the problem is that if you do not expand the ownership of the solutions, then you don't get solutions that last for too long. Bilateral, unilateral solutions clearly are faster. They look, more enticing, more attractive. But in the end, they are not as positive. They're not as, they don't have the same staying effect that something that is multilateral and that even if it takes longer to negotiate.
Mr. Gurria, on this front, I just wanted to mention a headline we are getting from Dow Jones saying that the U.S. is said to have proposed a new round of China trade talks, which would represent perhaps a step forward here because the two sides have not been talking. We've been seeing U.S. equities bounce on this, as well as some of the China ETFs. You mentioned earlier that since the financial crisis, as we have seen this sort of new economic global order, that many people have been left behind. Some critics of some of these multilateral trade agreements have said that those agreements are partially responsible for that bifurcated economic system that we see globally. What do you think is the opportunity here for a fixing of that or an improvement upon that, potentially through some of these bilateral discussions?
First of all, always welcome. Always encourage talk. Talk is good. Communication is good. To continue talking. And when the thing gets rough and, when you go through a rough patch, you just talk some more. So when it comes to the United States and China, I would say, they should do it like a permanent exercise, even if they sometimes may run out of things to talk about, because it is so important for the rest of the world. The level of uncertainty rises exponentially when there are tensions between the two largest economies in the world, and where there's this threat of retaliations and tariffs and sanctions, etc. And on the other hand, you just saw the moment they say they're going to talk, the tension reduces, and then the stock market, the confidence goes up. This is a very, very good way to signal to those responsible in both countries, but around the world in general, just keep the conversation going, because unilateral measures or even bilateral tension, when the protagonists are big enough, can really spread throughout, create uncertainty. That's deferring some consumption and investment decisions. Mm-hmm. It is slowing down the recovery.
And when you look at the role of the OECD and other representatives of the international community, what role do you think you can play, especially when, in some cases, the current leadership of the U.S. has spurned these international institutions?
The legacy of the crisis was low growth and destruction of jobs, higher unemployment, growing inequalities, and a destruction of trust in the institutions we built over the last 100 years. We have to pick up those pieces. 10 years into the crisis, still we see a recovery, but is now threatened by these tensions. We see good job creation in the United States, a little bit of recovery in some other places, but still we celebrate the fact that we're back to jobs at the same level before the crisis, and it's been 10 years. This just gives you an idea. And then the question of the inequalities, the question of the response to the inequalities has to be a much better balance between productivity, but also the question of inclusiveness. We left too many people outside of the recovery process, and we need to bring them in.
I'm just
Last
curious,
but not least,
though, Mr.
we need
Gurria,
to cover the trust in the international organizations, in democracy itself.
Yeah, so how do you do that then, Mr. Gurria? Because we've known that this has been coming. I mean, we've known this for a long time, and just most recently, almost 20% of the Swedish electorate clearly feels the same way of those in many other countries. So what do you need to do differently in order to address this that hasn't been done, frankly?
Precisely. We didn't deliver growth. We have to. For that, multilateral approaches, for that cooperation is indispensable. We didn't deliver enough jobs, and then jobs of enough quality. We have to cooperate internationally, and we have to apply multilateralism for better solutions and better outcomes. The question of inequalities, that has to be addressed. Inequalities are growing. They're still growing even today. And of course, the crisis created a very, very great acceleration in inequalities. And then there's this question of trust.
Yes.
Now, I mentioned that we've lost the faith in presidents, in prime ministers. We've lost the faith in ministers, in political parties, etc. And that is causing these governance, these electoral results, which sometimes are shocking us, but which, again, are telling us so many people are angry, so many people are frustrated, so many people feel left out, and those are the ones we have to focus on.